A disgraced cowboy receives a paralyzed woman as a twisted wedding gift from men who think they're witnessing the union of two worthless souls. When ruthless outlaws discover this unlikely pair, will they realize too late that they've underestimated the most dangerous partnership the plains have ever seen? Blood dripped from Ezra's knuckles onto the saloon floor as angry shouts filled the smoky air around him. The big man he just punched was getting back up, and 3 more cowboys were reaching for their guns. Ezra Hawthorne had always been fast with his fists, but today felt different. Today felt like the end of everything he'd worked for in the Nebraska Territory during this hot summer of 1867. The other ranch hands at Murphy's saloon were backing away from him like he carried some terrible sickness. "You yellow-bellied snake!" shouted Pete Wilson, wiping blood from his broken nose. Running from them Apache like a scared rabbit. "Jimmy died because of you." The words hit harder than any punch. 3 months ago, Ezra had been one of the best cowboys in Clearwater. He could rope a steer faster than most men could blink. His horse trusted him completely. Other ranchers paid good money for his help during cattle drives. But everything changed during the Apache raid in May. Ezra's hands shook as he remembered that terrible day. He and Jimmy had been checking fence lines when the war party came over the hill. 15 painted warriors on fast horses, whooping and firing arrows. Jimmy had grabbed his rifle and started shooting back. But Ezra had seen those fierce faces and felt his courage drain away like water from a broken bucket. He'd run, left his best friend to fight alone while he hid behind a rock like a child afraid of thunder. Jimmy died with 3 arrows in his chest. The Apache took his horse and rifle. They left his body for the buzzards under the hot prairie sun. Now the whole territory knew what kind of man Ezra really was. "Get out of here, Hawthorne," said Murphy, the saloon owner. His voice wasn't mean, just tired. "These boys got every right to be angry. You caused enough trouble for one day." Ezra picked up his dusty hat from the floor. Nobody looked at him as he walked toward the door. These men had been his friends once. They'd shared campfires and stories. They'd helped each other through hard times and dangerous work. But friendship couldn't survive what he'd done. Outside, the Nebraska sun beat down on Main Street like a hammer on an anvil. Clearwater wasn't much of a town. Just one dusty road with a few wooden buildings on each side. The general store, the blacksmith shop, the church, and Murphy's saloon. Most folks lived on ranches scattered across the endless grassland. Ezra's cabin sat 5 miles east of town, alone on a small piece of land he'd bought with his savings. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it had been his dream once. A place where he could build something lasting. Now it felt like a prison. His horse, Dusty, waited patiently at the hitching post. The brown mare was one of the few living things that didn't seem to judge him. She nuzzled his shoulder as he climbed into the saddle. "Come on, girl," he whispered. "Let's go home." The ride took an hour through rolling hills covered with tall grass that moved like ocean waves in the wind. Prairie dogs popped up from their holes to watch him pass. A red hawk circled overhead, hunting for rabbits. This land could be beautiful when a man had hope. Today it just looked empty. At his cabin, Ezra unsaddled Dusty and let her drink from the water trough he'd built last winter. The little building looked shabby compared to the big ranch houses where he used to work. The roof needed fixing. The porch steps were loose. Weeds grew around the foundation. He sat on those wobbly steps and stared out at the endless prairie. No other houses were visible in any direction. No smoke from cooking fires. No sounds except wind and insects and his own breathing. This was his life now, alone with his shame. The sun was setting when he saw 3 riders coming across the grassland. Even from a distance, he recognized them. Buck Morrison rode in front on his black stallion. Jake Patterson and Tom Wheeler followed behind like loyal dogs. Buck had been Ezra's friend once, back before the Apache raid. They'd worked cattle together and shared jokes around campfires. But Buck was also the kind of man who enjoyed other people's troubles a little too much. "Evening, Ezra," Buck called out as they got closer. His voice was too friendly, like a snake trying to sound like a songbird. "Mind if we water our horses?" Ezra nodded toward the trough. He didn't trust himself to speak. These men hadn't come just for water. Buck dismounted and let his horse drink while Jake and Tom stayed in their saddles. All three men wore guns on their hips and had the hard look of cowboys who'd seen too much trouble. "Been hearing interesting news in town," Buck said, taking off his hat to fan himself. "About your situation out here." "What situation?" "Living all alone like this. No wife, no family, no prospects." Buck's smile showed too many teeth. "The boys at Murphy's been talking. They think you need help." Ezra felt ice form in his stomach despite the heat. "Don't need help from anybody." "Now that's where you're wrong, friend." Buck put his hat back on and looked at his companions. "We heard about a family in trouble. Got a daughter needs looking after. Real bad." Jake leaned forward in his saddle. "Girl named Isabel Crane. Pretty as a picture, they say. Or was, before her accident." "What kind of accident?" Ezra asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Carriage turned over 2 years back," Tom said. "Broke her back. Can't walk no more. Been a burden on her family ever since." Buck nodded sadly, but his eyes were bright with mean humor. "Her uncle's desperate to find someone willing to marry her. They're even offering money, $50 and a gold watch that belonged to her daddy." The three men waited for Ezra's reaction like cats watching a mouse. He could see the cruel joke forming in their minds. The coward and the cripple. Two broken people nobody else wanted. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because we're your friends," Buck said. "And friends help each other out. The Crane family needs someone to take care of their girl. You need just about everything. Seems like a perfect match." Jake laughed. "Besides, it ain't like you got other options. No decent woman's gonna marry a man who runs from fights." The words stung because they were true. Ezra's reputation was ruined. No family in the territory would want him courting their daughters. He was damaged goods, just like this girl they were talking about. But something felt wrong about the whole thing. Why were these men really here? What did they gain from arranging this marriage? "What's in it for you?" he asked. Buck's fake smile slipped for just a moment. "Let's just say the Crane family is grateful to anyone who helps solve their problem. Grateful enough to pay a finder's fee." So that was it. They were getting paid to dump an unwanted woman on an unwanted man. Two problems solved with one cruel solution. "I need time to think about it," Ezra said. "Course you do." Buck remounted his horse. "But don't think too long. The family's getting desperate. Might start looking at other bachelors if you take too much time deciding." As the three men rode away into the gathering darkness, Ezra sat alone on his porch and wondered if this was rock bottom or if he could fall even further. The wagon arrived at dawn with squeaking wheels and a driver who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Ezra had spent the whole night pacing around his cabin, trying to decide what to do. Part of him wanted to refuse Buck's offer and send the girl back to her family. But another part, the lonely part that talked to him in the dark hours before sunrise, whispered that maybe this was his only chance at having someone to share his life with. Now, watching the old wagon pull up to his porch, he felt like a man about to jump off a cliff. The driver was a thin man with gray whiskers and clothes that had seen better days. He climbed down slowly, like his bones hurt, and walked over to where Ezra stood waiting. "You Hawthorne?" the man asked. "I am. Name's Henry Crane. I'm Isabel's uncle." He didn't offer to shake hands. "Got your bride here along with her things." The way he said bride made it sound like he was delivering a sack of grain or a piece of furniture. Henry walked to the back of the wagon and started untying ropes that held down a canvas cover. "She ain't much trouble," Henry said without looking at Ezra. "Keeps quiet most times. Can sew real nice and knows her letters. Just needs help getting around, if you know what I mean." Ezra's mouth felt dry as desert sand. "Maybe I should meet her first. She's awake. Been awake since before sunrise, matter of fact." Henry pulled back the canvas to reveal the wagon bed, which had been fitted with blankets and a thin mattress. The woman lying there was not what Ezra had expected. The men in town had called her pretty, but that word wasn't big enough for what he saw. Isabel Crane had hair the color of autumn leaves and skin like fresh cream. Her eyes were green as spring grass, but they held a sadness that made Ezra's chest feel tight. She was also clearly afraid, though she was trying hard not to show it. "You must be Ezra," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm Isabel, ma'am." Ezra touched the brim of his hat. I'm glad to meet you." It was a lie. He wasn't glad about any of this. But his mama had raised him to be polite to ladies, and this woman deserved better than the raw truth about why they were both here. Isabel studied his face like she was trying to read his thoughts. "They told you about my condition?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you're still willing to go through with this arrangement?" Ezra looked at Henry, who was already unloading boxes and bundles from the wagon. The old man clearly wanted to finish his business and leave as quickly as possible. "I reckon so," Ezra said. For the first time, Isabel smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it wasn't bitter either. Just tired, like she'd been disappointed too many times to expect much from anyone. "Well then," she said, "I suppose we should get started." Getting Isabel from the wagon to the cabin turned out to be more complicated than Ezra had imagined. She couldn't use her legs at all, and she was heavier than she looked. Henry helped, but the old man wasn't very strong. By the time they got her settled on the bed Ezra had prepared, all three of them were breathing hard. "There's a chair in the wagon," Henry said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Special made for folks who can't walk. Cost more than I wanted to spend, but Isabel insisted on paying for it herself." The chair had wheels instead of regular legs, and handles she could use to move herself around. It was cleverly built and must have cost a lot of money. Ezra wondered how a woman who couldn't work had earned enough to buy such a thing. "I had some savings," Isabel said, as if she'd read his thoughts. "From before." Henry brought in her belongings, 2 trunks full of clothes and books, a sewing basket, and a small wooden box that she held carefully in her lap. He worked quickly, like he couldn't wait to leave. "The arrangement's for 1 year," he told Ezra when everything was unloaded. "If it don't work out, you can send her back. But the money's yours either way." He handed Ezra a small leather pouch that clinked with coins. $50, as promised, plus a gold pocket watch that felt heavy in Ezra's palm. "This was my brother's," Henry said, looking at the watch. "Isabel's daddy. He was a good man who deserved better than what life gave him." He looked directly at Ezra for the first time. "I hope you'll remember that." After Henry left, Ezra and Isabel sat in awkward silence. The cabin suddenly felt very small with 2 people in it. Ezra had lived alone for so long that he'd forgotten how to share space with another person. "I should probably explain the rules," he said finally. "Rules?" Isabel raised one eyebrow. About how this is going to work. The sleeping arrangements and such." "I see." Her voice was carefully neutral. "And what rules did you have in mind?" Ezra felt his face getting hot. "Well, you can have the bed. I'll sleep on the floor, or maybe build myself a cot. And I won't. That is, I don't expect. We don't have to." "You don't have to pretend this is a real marriage," Isabel said quietly. "I know why you agreed to this arrangement. You need the money, and I need a place to live. That's all." Her words should have made him feel better, but they didn't. Instead, they made him feel small and selfish. "It ain't just about the money," he said. "No?" She looked at him with those sharp green eyes. "Then what is it about?" Ezra couldn't find an answer that didn't make him sound pathetic. The truth was too embarrassing to admit, that he was so lonely he was willing to marry a stranger just to have someone to talk to. "I guess we'll figure it out as we go," he said. Isabel nodded. "I suppose we will." She moved her chair to the window and looked out at the prairie stretching away in all directions. "It's very quiet here. Too quiet for most folks. I like quiet." She was silent for a moment. "What do you do out here?" "For work. I mean, try to raise cattle. Got about 20 head. But they're scattered all over creation. Sometimes I hire myself out to other ranchers. But..." He stopped himself before mentioning his ruined reputation. "But what?" "Nothing. Just that work's been scarce lately." Isabel turned her chair to face him. "They told me about the Apache raid." Ezra felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Who told you? My uncle. He thought I should know what kind of man I was marrying. Her voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel. He said you ran away and left your friend to die. That's true. The words came out like broken glass. I was a coward. Still am, I suppose. Are you? What do you mean? I mean, are you a coward now? Today? Or were you just a man who got scared once? Ezra stared at her. Nobody had ever asked him that question before. Everyone in Clearwater had decided what kind of man he was based on one terrible moment. But this woman, this stranger who had every reason to judge him harshly, was asking if that moment defined his whole life. I don't know, he said honestly. Then I guess we'll figure that out too. Isabel smiled again, and this time it looked almost real. Along with everything else. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Ezra began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this strange arrangement might turn out to be something more than just two broken people trying to survive together. But he didn't dare hope for too much. Hope was dangerous for people like them. The iron pot crashed to the floor, spilling beans everywhere as Isabel's wheeled chair bumped into the stove for the third time that morning. This isn't working, she said, her voice sharp with anger and something that might have been tears. Ezra looked up from mending his torn shirt at the kitchen table. 2 weeks had passed since Isabel arrived, and they were both learning that sharing the tiny cabin was harder than either had expected. The space that felt lonely for one person became cramped and difficult for two, especially when one of them couldn't walk. Let me help, Ezra said, starting to rise. No, Isabel's green eyes flashed. I can do this myself. I have to be able to do this myself. But as she tried to maneuver her chair around the spilled beans, Ezra could see the problem clearly. The cabin had been built for a man living alone. The doorways were barely wide enough for her chair. The kitchen counter was too high for her to reach properly. The whole place was like a puzzle with missing pieces. The cabin's the problem, not you, he said gently. Isabel stopped trying to clean up the mess and looked at him. Her face was red from effort and embarrassment. What do you mean? I mean, this place wasn't built for two people. Especially not for someone who needs to move around in a chair. Ezra knelt down and started picking up the scattered beans. We need to make some changes. Changes cost money. Money we don't have. We got $50 from your uncle. And I got some lumber stored in the barn from when I was planning to add another room. Isabel watched him work. You'd do that? Change your whole house for me? Ezra thought about it. A month ago, this cabin had been his private retreat from the world. Now the idea of making it work better for both of them seemed natural, even necessary. It's our house now, he said. Might as well make it comfortable. Over the next few days, Ezra threw himself into the work of rebuilding. He widened the doorway between the kitchen and main room. He lowered part of the counter so Isabel could reach the cooking area. He built shelves at the right height for her to store her things. The hardest job was building a ramp from the porch to the ground. Isabel had been trapped inside the cabin since she arrived, unable to get outside without help. But a ramp would give her freedom to come and go as she pleased. You're making an awful lot of noise out there, she called from the window as he hammered boards together in the morning sun. Good things take time, he called back. And loud hammering, apparently. Despite her teasing, Ezra could hear something new in her voice. Hope, maybe. Or just relief that someone was taking her problems seriously instead of treating her like a burden to be managed. The work was harder than he'd expected. His hands, soft from weeks of inactivity, developed new blisters. His back ached from bending over sawhorses. But something about the physical labor felt good. For the first time since the Apache raid, he was building something instead of just surviving. On the third day, while he was measuring boards for the ramp, Isabel wheeled herself to the porch to watch him work. You don't have to do all this, she said. I know. Then why are you? Ezra paused, considering his answer. The truth was complicated. Part of it was practical, they needed the space to work better. But part of it was something else, something he wasn't ready to name yet. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. Is that the only reason? He looked up at her, sitting in the shade of the porch roof with the morning light catching the red highlights in her hair. She was watching him with those sharp green eyes that seemed to see more than most people looked for. Maybe not the only reason, he admitted. That afternoon, as Ezra worked on finishing the ramp, he heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. 3 riders were coming across the prairie, and even from a distance he could tell they meant trouble. "Isabel," he called quietly. "Get inside." "What's wrong?" "Just get inside. Now." She must have heard something in his voice because she didn't argue. Her chair wheels made soft sounds on the wooden floor as she moved away from the window. The riders were strangers, rough-looking men with hard faces and guns hanging loose in their holsters. They rode like they owned the world and everyone in it owed them something. The leader was a big man with a black beard and small, mean eyes. He looked around the cabin and barn like he was taking inventory. "Afternoon," he said, not bothering to tip his hat. "Nice little spread you got here. Can I help you?" Ezra tried to keep his voice steady. "Depends. We're looking for work. Heard there might be opportunities in this area for men who ain't afraid of hard tasks." The way he said hard tasks made Ezra's skin crawl. These weren't men looking for honest ranch work. "Don't have any work available," Ezra said. "That's a shame." The big man's eyes moved to the cabin windows. "Heard tell you got yourself a wife recently. Pretty thing, they say. Must get lonely out here for a woman." Ice formed in Ezra's stomach. Somehow, word about Isabel had spread beyond Clearwater. And not just word about her existence, but details that made her sound like easy prey. "My wife and I like our privacy," Ezra said carefully. "Course you do. Course you do." The man's smile showed yellow teeth. "Thing is, we might be in the area for a while. Looking for a place to rest our horses, maybe get a hot meal. You understand." It wasn't a request. It was a threat wrapped in polite words. "The town's got a hotel," Ezra said. "Town's got sheriffs too. And questions. We prefer the countryside." The man looked directly at Ezra. "Heard you understand the value of avoiding questions. Something about running from fights." So they knew about his reputation too. Someone had told them exactly where to find a coward and his helpless wife. "You boys best move on," Ezra said, his hand moving closer to the gun on his hip. "Or what?" The second rider laughed. "You'll run away again?" The third man, younger than the others, was staring at the cabin with hungry eyes. Wonder if the stories about his wife are true. About her condition. Red rage flashed through Ezra's vision. These men weren't just threatening him. They were talking about Isabel like she was property they could take. "Get off my land," he said quietly. "Now, that ain't very neighborly," the leader said. "Especially considering we know all about you, Hawthorne. Know about your yellow streak. Know about that poor crippled girl you got in there. Seems to me you ain't in much position to make demands." The horses shifted restlessly, sensing tension. Ezra could feel sweat running down his back despite the cool afternoon air. 3 against 1, and his reputation said he'd run at the first sign of real trouble. But something had changed inside him during these weeks with Isabel. The shame that had eaten at him since the Apache raid was still there, but it was mixed with something new. Something that felt like anger, but cleaner, more focused. These men were threatening his home, his wife, his chance at building something good from the wreckage of his life. "I said get off my land." This time his voice carried the authority of a man who had found something worth fighting for. The leader's smile faded. "You sure you want to do this, Hawthorne? Word is you ain't much good when things get dangerous." "Guess we'll find out." For a long moment, the only sounds were wind in the grass and horses breathing hard from their ride. Ezra could feel his heart pounding, but his hands were steady. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't run. Not this time. The leader studied Ezra's face and apparently didn't like what he saw there. "We'll be back," he said finally. "Count on it." As the 3 men rode away, Ezra stood watching until they disappeared over a hill. Only then did he realize he was shaking. "Ezra?" Isabel's voice came from the doorway. "Are you all right?" He turned to look at her. She was pale but composed, and he wondered how much she'd heard. "I'm fine," he said. "But we might have trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Ezra looked toward the hill where the riders had vanished. The kind that tests whether a man's really changed or just been pretending. Thunder rolled across the prairie like the sound of distant cannons, and Isabel's needle stopped moving through the blue fabric in her lap. "Storm's coming fast," she said, looking out the window at clouds black as coal piling up in the western sky. Ezra secured the last board on the new ramp he'd been building and hurried toward the cabin. The wind was picking up, bending the tall grass and sending dust devils spinning across the yard. Nebraska storms could turn deadly without warning, and he wanted everything tied down before the worst of it hit. "Help me with the shutters," he called to Isabel as he reached the porch. She was already wheeling herself toward the window fastenings. Over the past week, they developed a rhythm of working together that surprised them both. She handled tasks she could reach from her chair while he took care of things that required standing or climbing. "Those men who came by yesterday," Isabel said as they secured the cabin. "Do you think they'll really come back?" "Probably." Ezra tested the latch on the last shutter. "Men like that don't make threats they don't mean to keep." "What did they want, exactly?" Ezra paused. He'd been trying to protect Isabel from the full truth, but she deserved to know what they might be facing. "Money, most likely. Food. Maybe." He struggled to find words that wouldn't frighten her too much. "Maybe they heard about you, about your situation. Some men think a woman who can't run away is easy prey." Isabel's hands tightened on her chair's armrests. "I see. But they're wrong," Ezra said quickly. "About you being helpless, I mean, and about me running if trouble comes." "Are they wrong about you running?" The question hung between them like the charged air before lightning strikes. Ezra had been asking himself the same thing for days. "I hope so," he said honestly. The first fat raindrops splattered against the windows as they moved inside. Within minutes, the drops became a downpour that drummed on the roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. Lightning flashed, turning the world outside stark white for brief moments. "I've been thinking about what you said," Isabel said, raising her voice over the storm noise. "About this being our house now. What about it? If it's really our house, then I should contribute more than just sewing and cooking." She reached for a wooden box she'd kept near her bed since arriving. "There's something I haven't told you about my life before the accident." Ezra settled into his chair by the fireplace, curious. Isabel had shared very little about her past beyond basic facts about her family and the carriage crash that changed everything. "My father owned a general store in Omaha," she said, opening the box carefully. "After my mother died, I helped him run it. Kept the books, managed inventory, dealt with suppliers." She pulled out a thick ledger bound in brown leather. The pages were covered with neat columns of numbers and careful handwriting. "I wasn't just helping," she continued. "By the time I was 20, I was running most of the business myself. Papa was getting old, and his eyes weren't good for reading fine print anymore." Ezra leaned forward. "You ran a whole store? For 3 years. We did well too. Better than most businesses in town." Pride crept into her voice. "I had plans to expand into dry goods, maybe open a second location." Lightning illuminated the cabin again, followed immediately by thunder that shook the walls. The storm was directly overhead now. "What happened to the store?" Ezra asked. Isabel's expression darkened. "After my accident, my cousin James took over. Papa had died the winter before I got hurt, so James was the only male relative left. He said a woman in my condition couldn't possibly manage a business. Even though you'd been running it successfully for years. Even though." Her voice was bitter. "He sold everything within 6 months. Said he was protecting me from the stress of business worries." Ezra was beginning to understand why Isabel had been so insistent on paying for her own wheelchair and keeping her personal belongings close. She'd lost more than the use of her legs in that carriage accident. She'd lost her independence, her livelihood, and her future. "Is that why your uncle was so eager to marry you off?" he asked. "Partly. James gives the family a small allowance for my care, but he makes it clear that I'm a burden. Finding me a husband meant one less mouth for him to worry about feeding." Another flash of lightning revealed something moving outside the window. Ezra tensed, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. "What is it?" Isabel asked. "Thought I saw." He peered through a gap in the shutters. Probably just a tree branch blowing in the wind. But his instincts were telling him something different. During his years as a cowboy, he'd learned to trust those instincts. They'd kept him alive more than once. "Isabel, I need you to listen carefully," he said, keeping his voice low. "There's a loose floorboard under your bed. Third board from the wall. There's a gun wrapped in oilcloth underneath it." She stared at him. "You hid a gun under my bed?" "Your gun. From your father's store. Your uncle gave it to me with your other things. Said you might want it for protection." "Papa's Colt." Her voice was soft with memory. "I'd forgotten Uncle Henry packed it. Can you still use it?" "I could shoot a playing card at 20 paces when I was 16. Some of her old confidence returned. "The accident didn't hurt my hands or my eyes." A board creaked on the front porch, too heavy and deliberate to be caused by wind. Ezra blew out the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness lit only by lightning flashes. "Get the gun," he whispered. Isabel moved her chair quickly toward the bed while Ezra positioned himself by the front window. Through the storm, he could make out shapes moving around the cabin. At least 3 men, maybe more. "They're using the storm as cover," he said quietly. "Smart." Isabel had retrieved the pistol and was checking its chambers with practiced efficiency. "Papa always said bad men prefer to work when honest folks are looking the other way." A voice called out from the porch, barely audible over the thunder. "Hawthorne, we know you're in there. Open up." It was the same man who'd threatened them yesterday, the one with the black beard and mean eyes. His companions would be positioning themselves around the cabin, cutting off escape routes. "What do you want?" Ezra called back. "Just to get out of this storm. Come on, be neighborly." Isabel wheeled herself close to Ezra. "They're lying." "I know." He checked his rifle's action. "If shooting starts, stay low and aim for center mass. Don't try to wound them." "I understand." Looking at her in the lightning's glow, Ezra saw no fear in her green eyes. Only determination and a kind of fierce readiness that reminded him why she'd been able to run a successful business at such a young age. "Hawthorne." The voice was closer now, right outside the door. "Last chance to do this the easy way." Something heavy slammed against the wooden door. Then again. The third impact splintered the frame. "Now we find out," Ezra muttered, raising his rifle. "Find out what?" "Whether I'm still the same man who ran from the Apache." The door burst open in a shower of wood splinters, and dark figures rushed into the cabin. The storm had brought more than rain and lightning. It had brought the test Ezra had been dreading since the day Jimmy died. This time there was nowhere to run. The first gunshot shattered the lamp on Ezra's table, sending glass flying like deadly rain through the dark cabin. "Down!" Ezra shouted, diving behind the overturned kitchen table as 2 more bullets punched holes in the wall where he'd been standing. The storm outside masked the sound of gunfire, which meant no help would come from neighboring ranches. Isabel had already dropped low in her chair, Papa's Colt steady in her hands. Lightning flashed through the broken shutters, revealing 3 men spreading out inside the cabin. The black-bearded leader kicked over chairs while his companions moved to block the windows. "Should have been smart, Hawthorne," the leader yelled over the thunder. "Now we do this the hard way." Ezra's rifle boomed, and the youngest outlaw spun sideways, clutching his shoulder. The man's scream of pain mixed with the wind howling through gaps in the walls. "That's for threatening my wife." Ezra worked the bolt, ejecting the spent shell. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at his mind. 3 armed men against a known coward and a woman who couldn't walk. Those weren't good odds. The familiar voice of fear whispered that he should surrender. Give these men what they wanted. Hope they'd leave Isabel unharmed. "Behind you!" Isabel's warning came just in time. Ezra rolled sideways as a gun barrel swung toward his head. The second outlaw had circled around the kitchen area, trying to get a clear shot. Ezra's elbow caught the man's wrist, sending his pistol spinning away into the darkness. They grappled on the floor, the outlaw stronger but Ezra more desperate. The man's fist connected with Ezra's jaw, stars exploding behind his eyes. But then Isabel's gun spoke, and the outlaw jerked backward with a cry of surprise. "You shot me," he gasped, staring at the blood spreading across his leg. "I was aiming for your heart," Isabel said coldly. "I'm out of practice." The wounded man tried to crawl toward his dropped weapon, but Ezra kicked it away. Outside, the storm was reaching its peak, rain hammering the roof like angry fists. "Give up, Hawthorne," the leader called from behind the overturned bed. "You're just making this harder on everyone." "Harder on you, maybe," Ezra replied, reloading his rifle. His hands were steady now, the shaking fear replaced by something cleaner and more focused. This wasn't like the Apache raid. Then, he'd been caught by surprise, overwhelmed by warriors who seemed to appear from nowhere. This time, he knew exactly what he was fighting for: his home, his future, and the woman who'd become more important to him than his own life. "Listen to me." The leader's voice had turned desperate. "We know about the money. $50 plus that gold watch. Hand it over and we'll leave peaceful like." So that was their real target. Someone had told them about Isabel's dowry. Ezra wondered who else knew about their arrangement, who else might see them as easy prey. "The money's mine," Ezra called back. "Earned fair and square. For marrying a cripple? That ain't earning, that's charity." The cruel words hit Isabel like physical blows. Ezra saw her flinch, saw doubt creep into her eyes. These men weren't just threatening their lives. They were attacking the fragile trust that had been growing between her and Ezra. "Don't listen to them," Ezra said quietly, moving closer to her chair. "They don't know anything about us." "Don't they?" Isabel's voice was barely audible over the storm. "Isn't that exactly what this is? You married me for money, and I came here because nobody else would have me." Thunder crashed overhead, but Ezra heard something else: horses whinnying outside. More riders were arriving. The three men in the cabin weren't working alone. "Reinforcements," the leader laughed. "Should have taken my offer, Hawthorne." But when the cabin door burst open again, it wasn't more outlaws who entered. Sheriff Coleman stumbled through the rain, his badge gleaming in the lightning flashes. Behind him came two deputies, guns drawn and ready. "Drop your weapons," Coleman shouted. "This is the law." The leader's face went pale. "Sheriff? How did you dash?" Mrs. Patterson saw riders heading this way during the storm. Figured they might be the same bunch that's been hitting ranches all month. Coleman's eyes took in the scene: wounded outlaws, bullet holes in the walls, Ezra and Isabel defending their home. "Looks like we got here just in time." The fight went out of the outlaws quickly. Faced with armed lawmen instead of a lone cowboy, they surrendered without further shooting. As the deputies tied them up, Coleman approached Ezra. "You did good here, son. These men have been terrorizing families all across the territory. We've been hunting them for weeks." "How many ranches have they hit?" Ezra asked. 7 that we know of. Killed 2 men, hurt several others." Coleman looked at the wounded outlaws with disgust. "They pick targets they think can't fight back. Isolated homesteads, old folks, families with small children. Or cowards with crippled wives," Ezra said bitterly. "Is that what you think you are?" The sheriff studied Ezra's face. "Son, I've been wearing this badge for 15 years. I've seen real cowards, and they don't stand and fight when outnumbered. They don't put themselves between danger and the people they care about." As the lawmen prepared to leave with their prisoners, the leader spat one last insult toward Ezra. "Enjoy your broken woman, Hawthorne. You deserve each other." The words hung in the air after the men were gone, poisoning the relief that should have followed their victory. Ezra looked at Isabel, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. "Is that what people think?" she asked quietly. "That we're both so damaged nobody else would have us?" Ezra knelt beside her chair, choosing his words carefully. "Does it matter what people think?" "It matters to me." Tears glistened in her green eyes. "I thought maybe we were building something real here. Something that wasn't just about money and convenience." "We are," Ezra said firmly. What we have isn't about what brought us together. It's about who we choose to be now. But even as he spoke, Ezra wondered if that was really true. Had he married Isabel just for the money? Was she staying only because she had nowhere else to go? The outlaws' cruel words had forced them to confront questions they'd been avoiding. Outside, the storm was finally moving on, leaving behind the fresh, clean smell of rain-washed earth. But inside the cabin, a different kind of storm was just beginning. I need time to think, Isabel said, wheeling herself toward the window, about what this all means, about what we really are to each other. Ezra watched her silhouette against the lightning-lit sky and felt something crack inside his chest. They'd survived the attack, but the real test of their relationship was just beginning. Morning sunlight streamed through the bullet holes in the cabin walls, creating patterns of gold on the wooden floor that should have been beautiful, but only reminded Ezra of how close they'd come to dying. Isabel sat at the kitchen table, her breakfast untouched, staring at a letter that had arrived with the sunrise mail delivery. The envelope was expensive paper, the kind used by important people for important business. It's from my cousin James, she said without looking up. In Omaha. Ezra felt his stomach drop. After the fight with the outlaws, after the cruel words about their marriage being nothing but charity, the last thing they needed was interference from Isabel's family. What does he want? To offer me a way out. Her voice was flat, emotionless. He's reconsidered his position about women in business. Says he'll sell me back half of Papa's store if I return to Omaha. I'd have a real income again. My own living quarters above the shop. She folded the letter carefully, her movements precise and controlled. He's even willing to pay you compensation for your trouble. Double what Uncle Henry originally gave you. The words hit Ezra like bullets. He wants to buy you back. In a manner of speaking. And what do you want? For the first time since receiving the letter, Isabel looked directly at him. Her green eyes held a sadness so deep it made his chest ache. I want to know why you really married me, Ezra. Not the pretty words you said yesterday during the fight. The real truth. Ezra sat down across from her, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. This was the conversation he'd been dreading since the outlaws forced them to examine their relationship. You want honesty? I want honesty. The money was part of it, he admitted. I won't lie about that. $50 is more cash than I'd seen in months. Isabel nodded, her expression unchanged. What else? I was lonely. So lonely I was starting to talk to my horse like she could answer back. The cabin felt like a tomb with just me in it. Anything else? Ezra studied her face, looking for some hint of what she wanted to hear. But her expression gave nothing away. I was curious about you, he said finally. The way you talked back to Buck Morrison that first day. The way you looked at me like you could see something others had missed. I'd never met a woman who seemed so unbroken, despite everything that had happened to her. Unbroken. Isabel repeated the word like she was tasting it. Is that what you see when you look at me? What do you see when you look at yourself? She was quiet for a long moment, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeams streaming through the damaged walls. I see a woman who used to run a successful business, and now can't even cook breakfast without bumping into furniture, she said. I see someone whose own family considers her such a burden they'll pay strangers to take her away. That's not all you are, isn't it? Her voice was sharp now, angry. Tell me, Ezra, if I could walk, if my family still respected me, if I had my own money and my own choices, would you have wanted me then? Or do you only care about me because I'm as damaged as you are? The question hung between them like a challenge. Ezra realized this was the real test of their relationship. Not bullets from outlaws, but the honest examination of their own hearts. I don't know, he said quietly. If you were the successful store owner you used to be, you never would have ended up here. We never would have met. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Ezra stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the prairie that stretched endlessly in all directions. I can't pretend to know who I would have been if things were different. But I know who I am now and I know who you are now. And I know that what we've built here feels more real than anything else in my life. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of Isabel's chair wheels on the wooden floor. She moved to stand beside him, or rather, to sit beside where he stood. James says I can have my old life back, she said. Independence, respect, a chance to prove I'm more than my disabilities. Sounds like everything you lost. It does, doesn't it? She reached out and touched his hand. But it's not everything I've found. Ezra looked down at her, afraid to hope. What have you found? A partner who sees my strength instead of just my weaknesses. A man who changes his whole house to make me comfortable. Someone who stands and fights when others would run away. I almost did run, Ezra confessed. Last night, when those men first broke in, every instinct told me to surrender. To give them what they wanted and hope they'd leave us alone. But you didn't. No, because running would have meant losing you. And I discovered that losing you scared me more than dying. Isabel smiled. The first real smile he'd seen since the letter arrived. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Even though it's probably not very romantic to be loved by a coward? You're not a coward, Ezra Hawthorne. A coward doesn't rebuild his home for someone else's comfort. A coward doesn't stand against 3 armed men. A coward doesn't choose love over safety. She held up James's letter. Do you know what I'm going to tell my cousin? What? That I already have everything I need. A business partnership with the man I love. In a place where we can build something new together. Business partnership? Isabel's eyes sparkled with the same determination he'd seen when she faced down the outlaws. I've been thinking about what we could do with this land. There's a main trail only 2 miles south of here. Travelers need supplies, food, a place to rest their horses. You want to open a store? I want us to open a store. Together. Use my business knowledge and your understanding of what cowboys and ranchers need. She gestured toward the damaged cabin. We'll need to rebuild anyway after last night. Why not build something bigger? Something that serves the whole territory. Ezra stared at her, seeing not the broken woman her family had discarded, but the brilliant businesswoman she'd always been. James's money could get us started, she continued. But this time we'd be real partners, equal partners. You'd give up the chance to return to your old life for that? My old life is gone, Ezra. It died in that carriage accident 2 years ago. Isabel took his hand in both of hers. But my new life, our life, is just beginning. Outside, a hawk circled high above the prairie, riding the wind currents with effortless grace. It reminded Ezra that sometimes the most beautiful things came from learning to work with circumstances rather than fighting against them. Equal partners, he said, testing the words. In everything. Even if people talk? Even if they say we're just 2 broken people who settled for each other. Isabel laughed, the sound bright and clear as spring water. Let them talk. We'll be too busy proving them wrong. The hammer slipped from Ezra's sweaty grip and nearly crushed his foot as angry voices carried across the prairie from the main road. There they are. Buck Morrison's shout could be heard half a mile away. The coward and his cripple wife, playing house. Ezra straightened from where he'd been nailing boards for their new store's front wall. 3 months had passed since the outlaw attack, and their trading post was finally taking shape. But now a group of riders approached with the kind of purposeful anger that meant serious trouble. Isabel, he called toward the cabin. We got company coming. She wheeled herself out onto the porch, shading her eyes against the October sun. How many? 8 or 9. Bucks leading them. The riders weren't just from Clearwater anymore. Word about Ezra and Isabel's growing success had spread throughout the territory, and not everyone was happy about it. Their little trading post was cutting into the profits of established businesses in bigger towns. Mr. Hawthorne, called a voice Ezra didn't recognize. A thin man in an expensive suit rode beside Buck, looking like he'd never done a day's honest work in his life. I'm Edgar Whitman, representing the Clearwater Business Association. We need to talk. The group dismed near the half-built store, their horses snorting and stamping. Ezra could see the mix of anger, jealousy, and something uglier in their faces. "Nice little operation you got here," Whitman said, looking around with obvious distaste. "Shame you didn't think to get proper permits before starting construction." "What permits?" Ezra kept his voice steady, but his stomach was sinking fast. "Building permits, business licenses, health inspections." Whitman pulled out an official-looking paper covered with stamps and signatures. "The territorial government takes these things very seriously." Buck grinned like a cat with a mouse. "Seems like you can't just decide to open a store without following proper procedures, Hawthorne. There are rules about these things. Rules that somehow don't apply to other stores?" Isabel's voice carried clearly from the porch. "Funny how these regulations only appeared after we started succeeding." Whitman's face reddened. "Mrs. Hawthorne, this is a matter of legal compliance, not personal prejudice." "Is it? Then why didn't anyone mention these requirements when we filed our initial paperwork 3 months ago?" The thin man's eyes shifted away from hers. "The paperwork was incomplete." "The paperwork was perfect," Isabel said calmly. "I've been handling business documents since I was 16. I know what's required and what isn't." One of the other riders, a stocky man with a sheriff's badge, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Marshal Hayes. These gentlemen have filed formal complaints about your operation. Safety violations, improper documentation, interference with established trade routes." Ezra felt anger building in his chest. "What safety violations? What interference?" "Well," Hayes consulted another paper. "You're selling goods without proper inspection certificates. Your building doesn't meet territorial standards for commercial structures. And several businesses in Clearwater claim you're undercutting their prices unfairly." "Undercutting their prices by being more efficient," Isabel said. "By offering better service and fresher goods. That's called competition, Marshal. It's perfectly legal." Buck laughed nastily. "Legal for real businesses, maybe. But this ain't a real business. It's just a charity case pretending to be something important." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Ezra saw red creep across his vision, but Isabel's calm voice stopped him from doing something stupid. "Mr. Morrison," she said pleasantly, "I have the sales figures right here if you'd like to see exactly how much of a charity case we are." She produced a leather-bound ledger from her lap. "Last month alone, we served 47 travelers, sold $300 worth of supplies, and provided emergency shelter for 2 families caught in that early blizzard." Whitman's eyes widened at the numbers. $300? That's impossible. Check with the customers if you don't believe me. Isabel's smile was sharp as a knife blade. "The Henderson family from Kansas. The Murphy Cattle Drive. Captain Morrison's freight wagons. Oh wait, that's your brother, isn't it, Buck?" Buck's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Your brother Robert bought supplies here last week. Said we had the best prices and freshest food he'd found between here and Denver. Quite complimentary, actually." The group of men exchanged uncomfortable glances. If Captain Morrison, one of the territory's most respected freight haulers, was shopping at the Hawthorne Trading Post, then other people would follow. "That doesn't change the legal issues," Hayes said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The complaints have been filed. I have to investigate." "Then investigate," Isabel said, "but do it fairly. Check our books, inspect our building, talk to our customers. Don't just take the word of competitors who are losing business to better service." Deputy Marshal Hayes looked like a man caught between duty and common sense. "I'll need to see all your documentation, business records, building plans, supplier contracts." "Of course." Isabel wheeled herself toward the cabin. "Ezra, would you help the marshal with the files? They're organized by date and category." As Hayes followed them inside, the remaining men huddled around Whitman and Buck. Ezra could hear fragments of their conversation through the open window. "More successful than we thought. Can't shut them down on these grounds. Need another approach." When Hayes emerged from the cabin 20 minutes later, his expression had changed completely. "Mrs. Hawthorne, your records are the most complete and accurate I've seen from any business in the territory. Every transaction documented, every supplier properly licensed, every regulation followed to the letter. Whitman's jaw dropped. But the complaints are groundless, Hayes finished firmly. This operation is completely legal and properly run. He looked at Buck with obvious disgust. Maybe you boys should focus on improving your own businesses instead of trying to tear down someone else's. After the deputy marshal left, taking most of the riders with him, Buck and Whitman remained behind. Their faces showed the frustrated anger of men whose plans had failed spectacularly. "This isn't over," Buck said quietly. "You might have fancy paperwork and legal documents, but you're still what you've always been. A coward who got lucky." "Maybe," Ezra replied, "but I'm a coward with a very smart wife and a successful business. What are you?" Buck's hand moved toward his gun, but Whitman grabbed his arm. "Not here. Not now." As they rode away, Isabel came out onto the porch. "They'll be back." "I know." Ezra picked up his hammer and returned to work on the store wall. "But next time we'll be ready." "Next time might not involve legal challenges or business complaints," Isabel warned. "Men like Buck don't give up easily. When they can't win fairly, they find other ways." Ezra drove a nail deep into the pine board with 3 solid strikes. "Then we'll face whatever comes. Together." But as he watched the dust cloud from the departing riders, he wondered what new trouble they were planning. Success had made them targets in ways they hadn't expected. And in the Nebraska Territory of 1867, there were plenty of ways to destroy someone without breaking any laws. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. But this time it was good news. Captain Morrison, Buck's older brother, rode up with a loaded freight wagon and a smile on his weathered face. "Afternoon, folks. Heard you had some excitement here today." "Nothing we couldn't handle," Ezra said. "Good to hear. My brother's always been too quick to stir up trouble." Robert Morrison climbed down from his wagon. "Brought you those supplies you ordered from Denver. And I got some news you might find interesting." "What kind of news?" Isabel asked. "The kind that says your little trading post here is about to get a lot more business. The territorial government's planning a new mail route that runs right past your front door. 3 times a week, starting next month." Ezra and Isabel exchanged glances. A mail route meant regular traffic, steady customers, and the kind of official recognition that would make it much harder for competitors to cause trouble. "There's more," Captain Morrison continued. "They're looking for an official mail stop along this stretch. Someone reliable who can handle deliveries and provide services for postal workers." "Interested?" Isabel asked Ezra. "Very interested." As Captain Morrison unloaded their supplies, Ezra realized that their enemies had made a crucial mistake. By trying to destroy their business with legal challenges, they'd only drawn attention to how successful and well-run it really was. Now that success was about to grow in ways none of them had imagined. But he also knew that Buck Morrison and his allies wouldn't give up. If legal methods had failed, they'd try something else. Something more dangerous. The war for their future was just beginning. Fire painted the night sky orange as Ezra raced his horse toward the trading post, his heart pounding with each hoofbeat that brought him closer to disaster. He'd been in town picking up mail when the flames started. Now, 2 miles out, he could see the glow against the clouds and smell smoke on the wind. Everything he and Isabel had built together was burning. "Please let her be safe," he whispered, urging his horse faster across the dark prairie. "Please let her be safe." When he crested the final hill, the sight that greeted him was both better and worse than he'd feared. The trading post itself was engulfed in flames, but the cabin still stood untouched 50 yards away. And there, silhouetted against the fire, was Isabel in her wheelchair, directing a bucket brigade of neighbors who'd come to help. "Ezra," she called as he dismayed. "Thank God you're back. Are you hurt?" He knelt beside her chair, checking for injuries. "I'm fine. But the store." Her voice caught as another section of roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. "How did it start?" "I don't know. I was inside the cabin when I smelled smoke. By the time I got outside, the whole back wall was already burning." Tom Henderson, a rancher from 5 miles south, jogged over with an empty bucket. We got here as fast as we could, but the fire had too much of a head start. I'm sorry, folks. More neighbors arrived throughout the night, bringing water and willing hands. The Johnsons from the east, the Pattersons from the north, even old Mrs. Mackenzie, who rarely left her homestead. People who'd been strangers just months ago now worked together to save what they could. But by dawn, the trading post was nothing but smoking ruins and charred timber. 6 months of work, Isabel said quietly, staring at the destruction. All our supplies, our inventory, our equipment. We can rebuild, Ezra said, though his heart felt heavy as stone. We did it once, we can do it again. With what money? We invested everything in stock for the winter season. The insurance money won't cover half of what we lost. Sheriff Coleman arrived with the sunrise, his face grim as he examined the ruins. After an hour of poking through the debris, he approached them with something in his hand. Found this buried under some boards, he said, holding up a glass bottle that still smelled of coal oil. Fire didn't start by accident. Ezra felt cold anger settle in his stomach. Someone burned us out. Looks that way. Question is who? I might have an idea about that, said Captain Morrison, riding up with his usual freight wagon. But this time, his brother Buck sat beside him on the driver's seat, hands tied behind his back. Found this fool trying to sell a bunch of brand new store goods in Millerville, Robert explained. Goods that match the description of what you folks had in stock. Buck's face was defiant despite his situation. You can't prove nothing. Can't I? Sheriff Coleman pulled out a notebook. Got 3 witnesses who saw you and Whitman riding this direction yesterday evening. Got the storekeeper in Millerville who remembers you trying to sell goods that still smelled like smoke. That's not enough for a conviction, Buck said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Maybe not, Coleman agreed, but it's enough to start asking harder questions. Like why Edgar Whitman left town on the midnight stage right after your little sale attempt. The sheriff's words hit Buck like physical blows. His partner had abandoned him, taking his share of the stolen goods and leaving Buck to face the consequences alone. He ran out on you, didn't he? Isabel said quietly. Left you holding the bag while he escaped with the profits. Buck's silence was answer enough. Why? Ezra asked. Why burn us out? We weren't hurting you that much. Weren't hurting us? Buck's composure finally cracked. You were destroying everything. Your little store was taking customers from every business in 3 counties. And for what? So a coward and a cripple could play at being important. The old insults should have stung, but Ezra found they had lost their power. Too much had happened, too much had been proven, for those words to matter anymore. We were providing better service, Isabel said calmly. Better prices, fresher goods, more convenient location. That's how business works. That's how business works when it's fair competition, Buck shot back. But nobody wants to compete against a sob story. Poor little crippled woman and her reformed coward husband. How can honest businesses compete with that? Sheriff Coleman snorted. Honest businesses? You just burned down their store and stole their merchandise. How's that for honest? As Coleman loaded Buck into his wagon for the ride to jail, more neighbors continued arriving. The Henderson family brought food and water. The Pattersons offered to help clear the debris. Mrs. Mackenzie hobbled over with a small cloth bag. Collected this from the folks who couldn't come, she said, pressing the bag into Isabel's hands. For the rebuilding. Inside were coins and bills, not much from each family, but together they added up to more than $50. Money these hardworking people could barely spare, given freely to help their neighbors start over. Why? Isabel asked, tears streaming down her face. Why would you do this for us? Because you did it for us first, Tom Henderson said simply. When my boy broke his leg last month, you folks gave us supplies on credit without asking questions. When the Pattersons' wagon broke down, you offered shelter and help with repairs. And when that early blizzard hit, added Mrs. Mackenzie, you opened your doors to anyone who needed warmth and food, didn't charge extra, didn't turn anyone away. Ezra looked around at the faces surrounding them. Cowboys and farmers, families and bachelors, people who'd become more than customers. They'd become a community. "We'll rebuild," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Bigger and better than before." "Count us in," said Captain Morrison. "I'll talk to the territorial mail service. They still need an official mail stop, and after what happened here, they'll want to make sure you folks have the support you need." "I can donate lumber," offered Patterson. "Got trees that need cutting anyway. And I can help with the construction," added Henderson. "Used to be a carpenter before I took up ranching." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Ezra felt something he hadn't experienced since before the Apache raid. The sense of being part of something larger than himself. These people weren't just offering help out of pity. They were investing in their own future, in the community that had grown up around the trading post. "There's one more thing," Sheriff Coleman said as he prepared to leave with his prisoner. "The territorial governor heard about what happened here. About the legal challenges, the business competition, and now the arson. He's sending an official investigator to look into whether there's been organized harassment of legitimate businesses." Buck's face went white. "What does that mean?" "Means if there's a pattern of illegal activity designed to drive out competition, everyone involved could face federal charges, including your friend Whitman, wherever he's hiding." As Coleman's wagon disappeared toward town, Ezra and Isabel sat among the ruins of their store, surrounded by friends they hadn't known they had. "Buck was right about one thing," Isabel said quietly. "What's that?" "We were destroying the old way of doing business. But maybe that's not such a bad thing." She gestured toward their neighbors, who were already planning the reconstruction. "Maybe it's time for something better." Ezra took her hand and looked out at the prairie that had once seemed so empty and hostile. Now it was full of possibility, full of people who'd chosen to stand with them against those who tried to tear them down. "Something better," he agreed. "Something worth fighting for." The fire had taken their building, but it had also revealed the strength of what they'd really built. Not just a business, but a community. And that was something no amount of jealousy or hatred could ever destroy. The golden ribbon stretched across the front of the new trading post like a promise fulfilled, while half the territory seemed to have gathered for the grand reopening celebration. "I can't believe how many people came," Isabel whispered to Ezra as they stood on the porch of their rebuilt store. The structure was twice the size of the original, with wide aisles designed for her wheelchair and living quarters attached to the back. "Believe it," Ezra replied, watching families arrive in wagons from as far as 50 miles away. "Word travels fast when good people do good work." But even as he smiled and waved at arriving guests, Ezra's attention kept drifting to a lone rider on the distant hill. The figure had been watching them for over an hour, never coming closer but never leaving either. "Ladies and gentlemen," called out Mayor Stevens from Clearwater, a round man who'd never shown much interest in their business before the territorial governor started asking questions about harassment of local merchants. "Before we cut this ribbon, I'd like to say a few words." The crowd gathered closer. Ezra counted at least 100 people, ranchers, cowboys, traveling merchants, families with children, even some of the business owners from town who'd once viewed the trading post as unwelcome competition. 6 months ago, Stevens continued, this couple faced the worst kind of adversity. Their business was burned, their livelihood destroyed by criminals and jealous competitors. But they didn't give up. And more importantly, this community didn't let them give up. Applause rippled through the crowd. Ezra saw Mrs. Mackenzie dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Tom Henderson beamed with pride at his carpentry work on the new building. "Today, we're not just reopening a store," the mayor said. "We're celebrating what happens when decent people stand together against those who would tear down rather than build up." More applause, but Ezra's unease was growing. The rider on the hill had moved closer, and something about his posture seemed familiar and threatening. "Ezra," Isabel said quietly, following his gaze. "Do you recognize him?" Before he could answer, Sheriff Coleman stepped up to the ribbon with a large pair of scissors. "Mrs. Hawthorne, would you do the honors?" Isabel wheeled herself forward, but as she reached for the scissors, a gunshot cracked across the prairie. The bullet splintered the porch post just inches from her head. "Everyone down!" Coleman shouted, drawing his weapon as panic spread through the crowd. The rider was galloping toward them now, and Ezra could see his face clearly. Edgar Whitman, the businessman who'd disappeared after the fire, had returned with vengeance on his mind and a rifle in his hands. "You ruined everything," Whitman screamed as he rode closer. "My reputation, my business connections, my whole life." He fired again, this shot shattering a window in the new store. Women grabbed their children and ran for cover behind wagons while the men reached for their own weapons. "Whitman's lost his mind," Coleman muttered, taking aim with his pistol. "Range is too far for a clean shot." "Not for me," said a calm voice beside them. Everyone turned to see Isabel holding her father's Colt revolver, the weapon steady in her practiced hands despite the chaos around them. "Isabel, no," Ezra said. "He's too far away, and if you miss dash, I won't miss." Her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years practicing marksmanship behind her father's store. 20 paces or 200, a target's a target. Whitman was closing fast, working the lever on his rifle as he prepared for another shot. In seconds, he'd be close enough to hit someone in the crowd. Isabel's gun boomed once. Whitman's rifle flew from his hands as the bullet struck the wooden stock. His horse reared in panic, throwing him to the ground where he lay stunned and defeated. The crowd erupted in cheers as Coleman and several other men rushed to secure the dazed attacker. But Ezra only had eyes for Isabel, who was calmly reloading her father's pistol with hands that didn't shake at all. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked in amazement. "I told you, I could hit a playing card at 20 paces when I was 16. She smiled up at him. "I never mentioned that I could hit the ace of spades specifically." As Coleman hauled Whitman away in handcuffs, the crowd's mood shifted from fear back to celebration. The ribbon-cutting ceremony resumed, but now it felt like something more. A declaration that this community wouldn't be intimidated by anyone. "Before we finish this," Isabel said, raising her voice to address the crowd, "I want to say something." The chattering died down as people gathered to listen. "When I first came here, I thought I was broken, useless, a burden that nobody really wanted." Her voice carried clearly across the prairie air. "I was wrong about a lot of things, but mostly I was wrong about what makes a person valuable." She looked at Ezra, then out at the faces of their friends and neighbors. "I used to think my worth came from being able to walk, from running a business, from being independent. But I've learned that real worth comes from the connections we make with others, from the way we lift each other up when times are hard." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "This store isn't just a business," she continued. "It's proof that when good people work together, they can overcome anything. Buck Morrison and Edgar Whitman tried to destroy us because they couldn't understand that. They thought competition meant tearing others down instead of building themselves up." "What happened to Morrison?" someone called out. Sheriff Coleman stepped forward. "Buck Morrison was sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison for arson and theft. Edgar Whitman will be joining him as soon as the circuit judge gets here next month." The crowd buzzed with satisfaction. Justice had been served, and the troublemakers who'd plagued honest businesses throughout the territory were finally facing consequences. "Now," Isabel said, taking the scissors from Coleman, "let's officially open this store and show everyone what this community can accomplish." The ribbon fell in 2 pieces as the crowd cheered. People surged forward to explore the new trading post, marveling at the wide aisles, organized shelves, and efficient layout that made shopping easy for everyone. "Mrs. Hawthorne," said a voice behind them. A well-dressed woman with kind eyes approached the porch. "I'm Martha Caldwell from the Territorial Women's Association. We've been following your story with great interest." "Oh," Isabel looked curious. "We'd like to invite you to speak at our annual convention in Denver next month, about overcoming adversity and building successful businesses despite physical challenges." Ezra saw Isabel's eyes light up with excitement. "You want me to speak publicly? We want you to inspire other women who face similar challenges. Your story shows that limitations don't have to define us." As Mrs. Caldwell explained the details of the invitation, Ezra felt a swell of pride for his wife. She'd gone from being discarded by her own family to becoming someone other women looked up to as an example of strength and determination. "There's something else," Mrs. Caldwell added. "The territorial governor has been impressed by your business practices and community involvement. He's considering recommending you for an appointment to the new Territorial Commerce Commission." "What would that involve?" Ezra asked. "Helping establish fair business practices throughout Nebraska Territory, making sure legitimate enterprises aren't harassed by corrupt competitors." Isabel looked at Ezra with questioning eyes. Such an appointment would mean travel, prestige, and influence far beyond their little corner of the prairie. "It's an honor just to be considered," she said carefully. "But I'd need time to discuss it with my husband and business partner." As the celebration continued into the evening, Ezra and Isabel found themselves standing alone on their porch, watching the last guests load their wagons by lantern light. "The commission appointment," Ezra said quietly. "That's a big opportunity." "It is. You should take it." Isabel turned to look at him. "Should I?" "You'd be helping people across the whole territory, making sure what happened to us doesn't happen to other honest business owners." "And what about our store? Our life here?" Ezra gestured toward the thriving trading post, toward the friends loading wagons, toward the community they'd helped build. "This place will always be here. These people will always be our friends. But you have a chance to make a difference on a much larger scale." Isabel smiled and took his hand. "We have a chance." Mrs. Caldwell said the commission position comes with an allowance for a business partner and advisor. "You want me to come with you?" "I want us to face whatever comes next together, just like we always have." As the last wagon disappeared into the darkness, Ezra looked out at the prairie that had once seemed so empty and hostile. Now it was full of possibilities, full of friends, full of hope for the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new adventures. But tonight, they had everything they needed: each other, a thriving business, and a community that had proven itself stronger than any force that tried to tear it apart. The lonely cowboy and the woman society had discarded had become something neither had expected: the pride of the plains. 3 years later, Isabel's voice rang clear and confident across the packed Denver auditorium as she addressed the largest gathering of the Territorial Commerce Commission in Nebraska's history. "When we started our trading post, people said we were just two broken individuals who'd settled for each other out of desperation," she said from her position at the speaker's podium, her wheelchair positioned so the audience could see her clearly. "They were wrong about the desperation part, but they were right about one thing: we were both broken." Laughter rippled through the crowd of business owners, government officials, and territorial delegates who'd come to hear the woman who'd transformed from a discarded burden into one of the territory's most respected advocates for fair commerce. "But being broken doesn't mean being worthless," Isabel continued. "Sometimes it just means you're ready to be rebuilt into something stronger." From his seat in the front row, Ezra felt the familiar surge of pride he experienced every time he watched his wife speak publicly. The shy, bitter woman who'd arrived at his cabin in a wagon was now confident enough to address crowds of hundreds, influential enough to change territorial law, and respected enough that the governor himself sought her advice on business matters. "The question we face today," Isabel said, "is whether Nebraska Territory will continue to tolerate the kind of harassment and intimidation that drove my husband and me from our beds to defend our livelihood with guns, or whether we'll create a system where honest competition replaces corrupt manipulation." Applause filled the auditorium. In the 3 years since their trading post had been attacked and burned, Isabel had documented over 40 similar cases across the territory: small businesses destroyed by larger competitors who used legal harassment, intimidation, and sometimes outright violence to eliminate competition. "The Hawthorne Fair Commerce Act," she continued, "will establish clear penalties for business harassment, create an appeals process for wrongly accused merchants, and most importantly, ensure that success comes from serving customers better, not from destroying competitors." More applause, but Ezra's attention was caught by a commotion near the back of the auditorium. A man was pushing through the crowd, and even from a distance, Ezra could see the anger in his movements. "Mrs. Hawthorne," the man shouted, his voice cutting through the applause. "What about honest business owners who've been destroyed by your special treatment?" Security guards moved toward the disturbance, but Isabel raised her hand to stop them. "I'd be happy to address your concerns, sir. What's your name?" "James Whitman. Edgar was my brother." A hush fell over the crowd. Edgar Whitman had died in territorial prison 6 months ago, still ranting about the injustices done to him by the Hawthorns and their supporters. "My brother wasn't a criminal," James continued, his voice shaking with emotion. "He was a legitimate businessman trying to protect his livelihood from unfair competition. You people destroyed him with lies and political connections." Ezra tensed, ready to move if the man became violent. But Isabel's response was calm and measured. "Mr. Whitman, I'm sorry for your loss. Losing a family member is always painful." Her voice carried genuine sympathy. "But your brother wasn't imprisoned for being a competitor. He was convicted of arson and theft. Convicted by judges who were influenced by your political allies. Convicted by a jury of his peers based on physical evidence and witness testimony." Isabel's tone remained patient but firm. "The bottle of coal oil found in our burned store. The stolen merchandise he tried to sell. The witnesses who saw him leaving our property the night of the fire. You set him up. You and your husband and that corrupt sheriff." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Ezra could see doubt creeping into some faces in the audience. People who didn't know the full story, who might wonder if the Hawthorns had really been innocent victims. "Mr. Whitman," Isabel said quietly, "would you like to know what really destroyed your brother?" "I know what destroyed him. Your special treatment because you're a cripple and he's a coward." The old insults should have stung, but Ezra found they bounced off him like rain off a roof. Too much had happened, too much had been proven, for those words to have any power anymore. "What destroyed your brother," Isabel continued, "was his inability to compete honestly. When our trading post started succeeding, he had two choices: improve his own business or try to destroy ours. He chose destruction." She gestured toward the audience. "Every person in this room faces competition. Some respond by working harder, offering better service, finding ways to serve their customers more effectively. Others respond by trying to tear down their competitors. That's easy to say when you have political protection." "Mr. Whitman," said a new voice from the side of the auditorium. Governor Harrison himself stood up, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Mrs. Hawthorne didn't have political protection when your brother burned down her store. She had something much more powerful: the support of a community that recognized her value." The governor walked toward the podium, his words carrying the authority of his office. "I've read every document related to your brother's case. The evidence was overwhelming. But more than that, I've personally visited the Hawthorne Trading Post and seen what they've built." He turned to address the full audience. "In 3 years, their business has become the most successful trading post in the Nebraska Territory. Not because of special treatment, but because they offer fair prices, quality goods, and honest service. They've created jobs for 12 people, provided emergency shelter for travelers, and contributed more in taxes than businesses twice their size. But they're still just a coward and a cripple." James Whitman's voice was becoming desperate. "How can they be more successful than real business owners?" "Because," said another voice from the crowd, "they understand something your brother never did." Captain Morrison stood up, his weathered face serious. "I've been hauling freight through this territory for 20 years. I've dealt with hundreds of businesses. The Hawthorns succeed because they focus on their customers instead of their competitors." "That's right," added Tom Henderson, rising from his seat. "When my family needed supplies on credit, they didn't ask questions about our ability to pay. They trusted us and helped us through a hard time." More voices joined in: customers who'd been helped, neighbors who'd been supported, competitors who'd learned to improve their own businesses instead of trying to destroy others. "This is what your brother couldn't understand," Isabel said gently to James Whitman. "Success isn't about tearing others down. It's about building something valuable and sharing it with your community." The angry man looked around at the sea of faces, all telling the same story of the Hawthorns' positive impact on their lives and businesses. His shoulders sagged as he realized he was fighting not just 2 people, but an entire community. They were still just charity cases, he said weakly. Were they? Governor Harrison asked. Because from where I stand, they look like exactly what this territory needs. People who turn challenges into opportunities, who build bridges instead of walls, who prove that worth isn't determined by circumstances but by character. James Whitman stood silent for a long moment, then slowly made his way toward the exit. At the door, he turned back. I hope you're right, he said quietly. I hope they really are what you think they are. After he left, the auditorium gradually returned to its celebratory mood. The Hawthorne Fair Commerce Act passed by